Welcome to Three, a show about Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, and part of the Tennis Channel podcast network. I'm Gill Gross with Joel Drucker and Amy Lundy. On today's show, we continue our serialized analysis stroke by stroke of the Big Three, and it is time to discuss the forehand. But first, we will get into some Miami memories because, of course, we are enjoying the Miami Masters 1000 despite the absence of the Big Three. But Joel and I and Amy as well were going over some of our memories from past and prior Miami tournaments. And Joel, one that really stuck out to me, I want to hear what you remember from this is you saw Djokovic very early on. He was a teenager in his first win over Rafael Nadal in Miami.
Yeah, it was very impressive. It's 2007. So, wow, it's 14 years ago. He was 19. Just prior, Novak had reached the finals at Indian Wells. So he's hitting the radar. He'd won some tournaments. It was clear to a degree how good he was. And then there he is in Miami. He avenges that loss to Nadal in straight sets. In the semis, he beats his peer Murray. Remember, those guys are only a week apart in age. Beats him 1-0. So in the finals, this is back when it was still a best-of-5 final. He plays Guillermo Cañas. And Cañas, for the second tournament in a row, had beaten Roger Federer. I mean, it's funny, just go way back to these players like Guillermo Cañas, who was somewhat of a, you would have liked him, Gill, kind of a Ferrer-type player, just a real grinding kind of player. He'd fought off a match point to beat Federer. I was at that match too. A great atmosphere. I mean, the Miami Stadium is a tremendous energy and like a soccer-like feel. And then, so here's Novak in the finals. He's going to play this Cañas, who's pretty hot, beats him in straight sets, like just completely relaxed, like one of my favorite lyrics, like he was walking onto a yacht, like completely relaxed. And he was just tremendous, so focused and so balanced. All the things, it would be interesting to watch that a little closer and then see how Novak has evolved over the 14 years. But still, all the signs were there.
So was he the youngest to ever win? 19? 19's got to be.
Agassi won in 1990, so he would have been 19. Courier, I'm just going right off my head. Close
well,
enough.
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly. You'd have to do one. It would be one of those months and days.
Okay.
Calculations. I think. Yeah, he might have been because Agassi's April birthday, Novak May. I mean, close enough. Win a big title like that as a teenager.
All right. Well, Novak at the time is number 10 in the world. And by the way, I just want to add one thing. The straight sets victory in the final is actually a 3-set victory because it was best of 5 at that time.
Right.
Joel, what was the perception that you remember of Novak Djokovic coming up as he was number 10 in the world? He was young, he was dangerous. What was his buzz?
Well, the buzz was he was pretty darn good. I mean, it wasn't certain. I mean, and Murray was already making moves then too, so they were a little paired as kind of next gen ascendants. I mean, this is early 07. By this time, Nadal has already won 2 French. Roger is kind of ruling the world at this stage, and so it's not quite. I don't think at Miami 07, I don't think anyone would have said, "Oh, Novak, yeah, he'll be number 3 for a few years next." I don't think that was quite there yet, as I recall. But his skill was good. It was impressive, and he was solid and fit. And again, it was, the pre 2011 Novak is a little different. Starting 11 is really when it begins the years of greatness. But again, 2007 Miami. By the end of the year, he's reached the U.S. Open final, and he's settling in to be 3. And by January 08, he's winning the Australian Open. A lot of these tournaments, like Miami and Indian Wells, often pride themselves on saying, "Hey, the man or woman who wins this tournament, who strikes it big here when they're young, within 12 months, they come back with something really big." And that's happened often in the history of tennis. Like Jim Courier wins Miami in 91, and he goes on to win the French. And so they come back with yet more goodies. And that's kind of a neat thing about these Masters 1000. So Novak then, he was impressive. But again, no, I don't think, and again, no one can predict anyone is going to win past 10 majors. That's unbelievable.
Although Rafael Nadal did reveal in his autobiography, Rafa, that he was afraid of when I say afraid, I just mean respectful of his dangerous nature before Novak was who Novak was. And Uncle Tony was really high on Novak from the very start when he was a teenager. But it's interesting you say that, Joel, about Miami being kind of a springboard, because I also think that Nadal, and then we'll get to Federer in a moment, Nadal, who's never won Miami and is 0-5 in finals and lost one to Davydenko and a couple to Djokovic and a couple to Federer, despite not having a title, it feels like his first match ever against Roger Federer in 2004 in Miami kind of set the tone for that rivalry and set the tone in a way where it was like, okay, this is a serious threat to Roger Federer.
Absolutely. And this was less than 2 months after Federer had become number one in the world. So Federer reached the number one ranking in 04, winning the Australian. He'd already held the Wimbledon title. So Roger and the Roger buzz, makes me think a bit of like Michael Jordan, where it's like, yeah, this guy is really good. He's more than really good. And it's seen quickly and early in the guy's thing. Like no one after Federer won Wimbledon in 2003, will he win another slam? I was like, that wasn't a question. So now he comes into Miami in early 04, and this 17-year-old who hasn't even played the French yet knocks him off and has a lot of the Nadal signs, though it's still kind of raw. I mean, it's the forehand, it's the get the serve and play, it's the running, it's the intensity. Yeah, and he jolted Roger that time, and a year later was beating him 2-0 in the final, again best of 5 final, and Nadal lost that match. Probably his best chance to win the tournament was that first final he reached in 05.
So you guys said that Nadal was in the final 5 times,
Yeah,
and has never won. And I would think that because of the Spanish speaking and Miami being, this hot Latin city, that Nadal would want to win that one, but it is not helped by its position on the calendar, which is right before clay season, and he's trying to prep for clay season, and it's a hard court.
Well, but it's also after Indian Wells, so it's a lot of physicality. It's a lot of hard court wear and tear for Rafa, and so that's a good point. And then he's come across some opponents, and it's just to look at those things in the big picture, and then you look in the small picture, like, Novak and Roger got you. Well, okay, Davydenko, where'd that happen? But those things happen. That's kind of the neat thing about tennis, and Roger beat him in 05, and then the resurgent Roger got him in 2017.
Davydenko is notoriously Nadal's like worst matchup in the world. Is it 4-0 or something like that? I don't think Nadal's ever defeated him. But let's move ahead here, because I do think that Nadal kind of sent a message to the entire tour and Roger Federer in 2004. And I think Djokovic does the same thing in 2011 when he completes the Sunshine Double. We all know about how great Djokovic's 2011 season was, but I think that was where it was like, okay, this is a special player right now. This isn't just a great player. This isn't just the best player in the world. This is a historically good player after he wins Indian Wells, and then he beats Nadal in the final in Miami in a third set tiebreak. And it was an amazing match.
Yeah, the Sunshine Double, that's an important thing. It would always be interesting to make like a list of some of the neat non-slam achievements, whether it's the Sunshine Double, whether it's Monte Carlo, whether it's or it's two red clay wins, or is it Canada Cincinnati, or whatever those happen to be. But that was a real impressive run from Novak in 2011. He'd won the Australian, and then again he wins these two, and now he's won the Miami 6 times. He's tied with Agassi for the most ever.
Yeah. And then to put a cherry on the top of this for Roger Federer, Miami hit a Sunshine Double of his own in 2017. That is where he captured his 3rd straight win over Nadal. And that really cemented a very distinctive turn in the rivalry. It was a point where you just could not argue anymore that Federer had kind of solved that Nadal puzzle, at least for the time being. So significant moments really for all three in Miami.
Well, 2017, Roger, that's got to be like the ultimate. If there are any more cherries on the top of his sundae, they'd have to see a dentist. My God, he was just, that might be that period from January 17 to, let's say, the Australian 18, and then regaining the number 1 ranking at the age of 36. What what a resurgence that was for Federer. And the Miami stuff, in fact, and on that Miami 17, a great match with Nick Kyrgios that was all tiebreakers that Federer won in a third set tiebreak, and that had that Miami energy that Amy was talking about. Yeah, it's interesting though how hasn't quite caught for Rafa, and he'll be. No one likes being part of a tournament where they've lost in the finals 5 times and haven't won it, but then he marches on, and then he goes off to Monte Carlo where you lost track of how many times he's won it.
Yes, and Nadal has not played Miami since 2017, so you know that factors in, and part of the place in the calendar as well. Let's move on to the forehand. This is to me at least. Let's start here. For me, it's the foundation of modern tennis is the forehand. Do you agree, Amy?
Yeah, it's for the vast majority of players, it's the centerpiece or the pillar that holds up the rest of their game.
Yeah. And I think it's a really interesting conversation with these three, especially I think with Nadal and Federer, because you can make a lot of arguments both ways. They have distinct forehands that are deployed in different ways and act in different ways. Which one's better? It's a really interesting conversation to have. We're never going to reach a definitive conclusion, but on the way to discussing that question, I know that we can take it a lot of interesting places. So, Amy, let me give you the floor on comparing Federer's forehand to Nadal's forehand.
Well, it's interesting that we're doing this show because I'm working on a little mini project with a group of coaches from data-driven sports analytics, and Shane is the main guy there. And he's looking at the grips of all the forehand grips of all the ATP players, or maybe the top 25 or something like that. And he's been emailing me little bits of his research because he wants me to write about it, and I will at some point. But it's interesting to me that our three have 3 different grips, and one Federer has the Eastern grip on his forehand, which is less margin, but some would say more versatile because you can handle short balls better and maybe more conducive to approaching and that kind of thing. And it totally fits his personality. Nadal, of course, Shane tells me it's not totally Western. It's between semi-Western and Western, to get technical about it. But it's obviously a more Western grip that makes use of the topspin and gives him tons of margin and lots of jump. And Djokovic has the semi-Western, which, according to Shane, is really the best grip. And it's the big reason why Djokovic has been able to win on the different surfaces and adapt quickly to the different surfaces. And personally, I think Djokovic maybe has the most improved forehand of the 3 right now.
That's a fascinating assessment. I would love to see. It'd be fun to see the visuals when they come out to see where the grips in the hand is located. The Federer Nadal contrast is pretty obvious. Where Novak fits in, where they all fit on the spectrum of that, I think is really fascinating. Novak, no question, the most improved. The other guys were pretty A to A plus anyway. And Novak in the early years, including that 07 through 2010 period that we were talking about earlier, a little wobbly, sometimes a little too flat. So I don't know, it was moving the grip or making the shape to get some more margin. And it's funny, Amy, you must have been reading my notes because I wrote like one word to describe each of these forehands. And for Nadal, I had the word jump, because we know obviously what he does. He hits the forehand that busts the contact points. And the lefty part is massively significant because the natural shot, the natural cross court goes to the righty backhand. I mean, we could probably find some record somewhere about Nadal versus one-handed backhands. Boy, I mean, and it took the great Roger Federer to make several wholesale changes to kind of problem solve that. Racket size, backhand technique, court positioning, footwork, which Roger has, so Baryshnikov could do that. Not so easy for a great many others. So it's interesting. I mean, I think with Shane, I mean, Novak, maybe now, whatever best, this reminds me of our serve discussion. Best for what, for whom, for when, where.
Well, most adaptable was, I mean,
Ah,
for me, and I'm a big fan of semi-Western because that's my grip. And to me, it's the problem I have with the Eastern grip is that it's so much like continental that, or it's just 1 degree over from continental, that if it's easy for me to go from semi-Western to continental because they're two defined different grips. So if I get a little slippage or something like that, I can click right back into it. I think semi-Western is that grip that is able to adapt to different surfaces. You got a low ball, you can click over. You got a high ball, you can get some margin. It's easy on the body. I think that his research is going to show that it truly is the superior. That doesn't mean that Novak has a superior forehand, but
well,
I just raised the issue of grips.
I love it. I think it's fantastic. Well, I think a grip is a great begins. It's the starting point of the shot, which, by the way, has always been the big shot in tennis. It's always been the forehand or the backhand. I mean, there are eras where serve and volley was more prevalent, but throughout the history of tennis, if you had a choice of a big forehand or a big backhand, it's always been the forehand that is the shot that really delivers things. And backhands have improved, and the two-hander and the roll of tops. And with grips, though, and you have a one-handed backhand, Amy?
Yeah.
But
And
so
it's an Eastern backhand grip.
You got a lot of traveling to do to get.
Oh, I got so many grips. I mean,
how are most points? I would say right now it almost feels like a lot of the time most points are won with the forehand, and I think a lot of the time when I throw on YouTube and watch tennis a couple eras back, it feels like most points are won at the net.
Well, right, they were one with the net, but in the era, they still had ground strokes. Then no question. Like if you're going 30 or 40 years, but they really have a forehand, whether it was Ivan Lendl or Jimmy Arias or John Newcomb or Jack Kramer. I mean, the forehand was a useful shot to have, and you didn't, and the backhands weren't as good, so you served to the backhand if you were serving volleying a lot, and the forehand was considered. But it was more up and down, and the continental could be kind of slappy, and Laver's forehand and his backhand was great, but his forehand was it's a different way.
Or Jimmy, right? Or Connors.
Well, Connors was the backhand. Connors' backhand was better than his forehand.
Right.
But Gill, you said that most points are won on the forehand. Probably most points are lost on the forehand as well. Either,
yes.
yeah,
Well,
the whole game is the forehand, except for a very few odd players.
Right.
Oh, no, I think
for sure.
I think Amy's right. Totally right. If you had a choice of a big forehand or a big backhand, take the forehand. Like I always find forehand people, I joke because I'm not a forehand person. I'm a little more of a backhand person of my one-handed. Forehand people, they don't care that they have a worse backhand. They run around and they manage the backhand. Then they keep it in play and they're fine. And they can just bully you with that forehand.
Well, sure. Let's make this very simple, very clear. Nobody's backhand is as good as first. Let's take Novak Djokovic, who's known for his backhand. His forehand's still better. His forehand does more damage. It's better. Now, comparative to the average player, his backhand is better. There is a larger gap between Djokovic's backhand and everyone else's backhand. And that becomes very clear when he gets into those ad court rallies and he breaks down these righties backhand and backhand. But it's not like Novak is going to, when he has plenty of time on the ad court, it's not like he's not going to run around and hit a forehand, because that's the more damaging shot.
No, but you mean his forehand does more for him. That's different than saying you didn't need to say it's better than his backhand. It does.
Yeah,
it accomplishes more for him. But this is an interesting point about Novak. By the other hand, if I was coaching versus him, I knew I'd have to somehow find my way to that forehand because that backhand is impregnable. But this is the whole. I mean, I think Amy, you tweeted something recently about this, about the role of the backhand. Is what's the O'Shaughnessy term? The shield. The
shield versus the sword. The forehand's the sword. The backhand is the shield.
The backhand is that the backhands don't break down. It's a very Novak's backhand does not break down, but that's why he's probably got the most balanced ratio, because his forehand isn't the brilliant one, while his backhand is really good. And our guy Nadal's got a pretty good backhand, but the forehand is unbelievable. And there's a lot of this. I'd say the same thing with Roger.
Yes.
Well, two different coaches have told me that you used to be able to break down Novak's forehand,
Right.
but within the last 2 years, you can't anymore. It's extremely improved. It's much more reliable, and it's much more of a weapon.
I think it's been really good though for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Since, I mean, here's the thing with Novak. It was interesting, Amy, because I did try to tee you up on Federer and Nadal. Then you put Novak in, which I'm glad you did. I think Djokovic's forehand somehow, after being world number one for more weeks than anyone in the history of the sport, his forehand is still somehow probably underrated, because it's a really, really great shot. It's just, to me, it's not doesn't have as much of a spot in the pie chart of why Novak is great. Whereas when it comes to Federer and when it comes to Nadal, I'm designating a large portion of the pie chart to the forehand and what they do on that side.
Yeah, and I think yes, but the what makes Novak so great may be the whole pie chart.
For sure.
The fact that it is so balanced and he doesn't have bigger pie in one area. It's something to think about.
Absolutely. Let's talk about surfaces and how the forehands have affected the relative success that the three have had on different surfaces after the break. We started talking about grips and how Nadal is the most extreme Western grip and Federer's on the other end with the Eastern. And I think a similar parallel can be made about Federer's forehand or just Federer in general having the most success on grass courts, quick, slick, low bouncing courts, and Nadal liking the higher bouncing courts and perhaps the slower courts, namely the clay courts, and Djokovic maybe being a little bit in the middle. So it kind of works. How big a part of the success that the three have had on their respective favorite surfaces, how much of that comes back to the forehand? I think maybe quite a bit.
Yeah, I would say very much so. And again, you look at Federer and the Eastern, and having myself grown up in the Eastern, even out of the continental era, a little. The case for the Eastern is accuracy. Pancho Segura, the great coach, strategist, had a great two-handed forehand. Pointed out to us, the Western is a little harder to aim to specific spots. You can aim, you have your 3 to 4 foot range, but you can't quite be as accurate with it as you can with the Eastern. So that's why, like in the old days, approach shots, passing shots, returns, there's a certain type of precision that the game, it's interesting what defines margin in different eras.
I think that Eastern is the one that you can redirect, like Medvedev has an Eastern. Right. And of course, Roger can redirect beautifully. He can also generate his own pace, but I agree that that's the perfect grip for that.
Yeah, talk about precise forehands. I mean, Federer stands head and shoulders above everyone else, and I think his Padawan on the tour right now is Tsitsipas, who has incredible accuracy and uses it to hit great approach shots. That's right.
So that's the Eastern, and of course, again, lower bounces, faster surfaces, coming to net more. It's so interesting how the game, like to look at a shot. It's fun to look at these shots, and then what we're trying to do with all this is look at them kind of holistically in their game. So it's like how they work, how they fit in to that player's particular game and style. And you see Novak, who has this sustained depth, and he's pretty accurate too. And Nadal, though, can. It's not always so much about accuracy as much as about lethal things. He hits a share of accurate passing shots, but it's kind of like, it doesn't matter. It's a 5 foot part in that guy's backhand corner. Accuracy, schmaccuracy here.
Heaviness, right?
That's right. And bounce and contact point disruption. I mean, Nadal would be the worst one to play against from a contact point standpoint. Nadal would be the one that, if it wasn't happening for you that day, that's why Nadal, for example, is so good in the wind. He's not trying to pinpoint anything. He's just digging in there and hitting it. He's got margin and arc and safety, and you got the wind, you got the ball. You feel like you're combing your hair. It's brutal.
I think the thing that all three of them have is timing and balance. on the forehand. I mean, you could take a picture of any of the three of them and you get that classic shoulder turn. You know, the body, the legs, the lower body in perfect balance, and the kinetic chain coming through the ball. You don't have any awkwardness with any of them.
Yeah, I mean their technique is so solid all around. If I could be a little bit rigid about the effectiveness of a forehand, right? You have a couple of attributes that could play in, right? And one is pace, and that goes hand in hand with taking time away, right? And depth. So pace and depth. And I think Federer and Djokovic are really kind of take ownership of those two things. Then Nadal, I think, is more height and width of the court. Angles, he finds that the other two don't exactly find, even though, you know, there are exceptions to everything. And then height is kind of what you were talking about, Joel, with the contact point. So when you have a faster court, like Wimbledon center court, you're going to be aided more by your pace and your depth, and you're taking time away. And when you have a higher bouncing, slower clay court, it's going to be more about how do you open up the court with angles, and how are you taking advantage of the high bounce and those kinds of things.
Well, you look at Nadal, for example, you see the court becomes a circle sometimes when he's got that forehand, because the bounce isn't going. It used to be the way back, the bounce went through the court. You know, you see, and now it's the bounce is going, Nadal is going off the court. So the guy, you got so much court to cover. So, and I was trying to think of how we even understand these, not understand these forehands, what you might teach, what you might learn from the three backhands are drastically different in deployment, in philosophy, and all that. And we cover that. The three forehands, while different, the deployment is somewhat similar in ways because of what the forehand means in the game. I mean, to destroy the opponent.
But as we noted, and as we've noted before, it's also the shot that a lot of the players on the ATP Tour right now are going to. They're going to their opponent's forehand because it also draws the most errors. And in many cases, it can be that thing that breaks down.
Yeah, if it takes a shot as someone with a better backhand than forehand, the backhand, once you get it kind of down, it doesn't betray you. But the forehand, you demands a discipline. Yeah. And if you're not having it, I mean, we've even seen that with Federer. We've seen that with Federer, you know, some shankage and all that. So the interesting thing, I think, as the game evolves, it'll be less about maybe breaking down a stroke, because these two-handers are pretty solid, as much as figuring out different corners of the court to move people into and do that with.
Also, part of Amy's point is, let's not ignore defense here. Even a player like Nadal, I think he's a little bit stronger to his backhand side when it comes to defending. The same might be true about Djokovic. I don't think it's true about Federer. But, you know, there is something to be said for thinking about the forehand from that perspective, and just as a more erratic shot. But Zverev and Medvedev are two players who are becoming rivals of the big three, younger rivals, and they just don't have the forehand down with as much tact, to your point.
Oh no, well, Medvedev is very much an improv forehand. I mean, I think it's not the technical aspect of it is a little, you know, he pretty much learned it himself, and his buddy Rublev kind of talked about that, you know, because Rublev has this tremendous forehand, is very flat and powerful, and Medvedev is kind of like you talk about redirect, right? There's a guy who just takes it in, and so figuring out how to decode him is a fascinating process.
It breaks down though when he needs to generate offense with it.
Right.
It really breaks down, and Zverev has had issues with the same thing throughout his career. Borna Coric is another with a tremendous backhand and hasn't really figured out the forehand. Francis Tiafoe isn't quite to that level, but he's another one with some funky technique on the forehand, and it's kind of held him back. Karen Khachanov, you could throw in there with long technique.
Cilic.
It's kind of a feast or famine shot for a lot of guys outside of the big three.
Yeah.
Like if that thing is firing, then they're going to win in a blaze of glory. If it's producing a lot of errors, then this could get ugly.
And one
Yeah, so
last
it's interesting.
callback.
Yeah. Hmm?
I was going to say one last callback to an earlier show we did about Andy Murray. It was the first show that we ever did, us three, and we talked about how one of the big reasons why Murray wasn't quite what the big three were was just the potency of the forehand. It just kind of lags behind the other three.
So the upside for the coaching, okay, so the upside, if we want to look at something for aspiring players of all levels, is how do you invest R&D money in the forehand? And what you use, it's not as simple as just pick the guy off the rack and you want his forehand. I mean, the person, I think, needs to understand their game, their skill set, their many kinds of things, righty, lefty, even the surfaces they play on, if they're going to be coming to net more, etc. So, but the need to invest in the forehand, it's almost like the backhand is the cost of admission. In other words, to be a professional tennis player these days, you need to have a pretty darn good backhand. It's mostly a two-hander. The one-hander needs to be super duper good. There are one-handers, but the ones that make it, and I even think of, like, I love Cole Schreiber's backhand and Federer and Tsitsipas, but it needs to be like an attention grabber. It needs to do it can't, whereas the two-handers, it's like, yep, that's the pretty solid two-hander that a great many players have, and it can be a pretty darn good shield, and it accomplishes a lot. But the one-hander needs to be in the 0.001% or die.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, well, there you have it, the basis of the modern game, as we all agreed on at the start, and three unbelievable forehands in Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. All lots of things to be taken from, different things from the three, and it's always fun with this stroke-by-stroke analysis. I think we have still a couple more left. We are not done. Miami will conclude. We will look ahead to Monte Carlo very, very soon. Stick with us. Make sure you're subscribed on whatever your preferred podcast platform is. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Comment, like the video, subscribe on YouTube, and we will see you next time on the next episode of 3.